Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, Trellis and Trails Homestead. I'm Jacqueline. I am doing a big sourdough microbakery week. It is Thanksgiving week. Today is Sunday, and I have many Thanksgiving orders to fulfill this week. So I'm going to bring you guys along. I've already started one. It's Sunday midday. This morning I baked 2 loaves for some friends. Look how stunning these 2 loaves are. These are both rosemary garlic loaves. They're so beautiful. They turned out great. And I'm so excited to share these with my friends tonight. They're just so pretty. They made my house smell incredible this morning, and I'm so sad that I didn't make one for myself. So I might even prep a loaf for us for the week. I probably will while I'm doing all of this. I need to get a plan together. I kind of jotted some ideas down already for how I'm going to plan out my week as far as feeding the starter, prepping the dough, when I'm going to do all of those things. So I just want to kind of get it written down on paper just so I can have a quick visual to look at throughout the week as I'm thinking about when to prep the breads and things like that. So I don't have any more to bake for a little bit. I do have tomorrow an order of cinnamon rolls, and that's a discard recipe, so that'll be easier. But I will need to feed some starter and get some things prepped in the meantime. Just because I don't have like a huge, bakery oven or anything like that. I just have my regular traditional oven, and I only have one Dutch oven. I know that sounds crazy for baking a bunch of loaves at one time, but I actually do bake one loaf at a time just because I have one Dutch oven and I kind of prefer to do it that way. For now, we're baking one loaf at a time. So to do that takes basically an hour per loaf. So if I have a huge baking day on Wednesday, that's my biggest day this week. And I have, I think, 6 loaves to bake on Wednesday, in addition to 3 cinnamon roll orders, a focaccia order, and I think that's it for Wednesday. But that's a lot in one day, especially when you're only doing one loaf at a time. So the cinnamon rolls, I can do a couple batches of those at a time. I'm actually going to be using these. I kind of tested some cinnamon rolls the other day. I'm using these aluminum pans here, and this was really perfect. So I tested a batch of cinnamon rolls the other day, and I have them over here. And I baked them in this aluminum pan just so that I could get a good idea of how it was going to work. Don't worry about these. We've already eaten through half of them, so there's only probably a few left. But they turned out delicious. They still even look sort of appealing. They're really good if you just put them in the microwave for like 10 seconds. They're so good. And these are sourdough cinnamon rolls. So I can fit 2 of these, even 3 if I need to, 3 or 4 in my oven at one time. I'm just one of those people that likes to bake on the top rack of my oven. I have my sourdough starter here. I have 3 of them currently out, and they're all fed right now, so they look like they're rising, which is great. I've been feeding them regularly over the last couple of days just so that they would be really good and active and ready for this week. And then, of course, I used them for the 2 sourdough loaves that I made this morning, and then I refed them for the day. So yeah, I really just like to bake on my top rack if possible. The bottom rack is fine, but I just don't want the bottom of anything to get too, cooked or burnt or anything like that. I don't think that it will. I mean, my oven is pretty large. It's a fairly normal traditional oven, but I think it will be fine. I just prefer to bake on the top rack. And then when I'm using my Dutch oven, it's kind of a higher one. I have to put the top rack down a level anyways for it to fit with the lid on. So that's the deal with that. I can't bake something in my Dutch oven and then put something on the rack below it and bake that at the same time because it's just too close together. The racks are too close together to do that. So, yeah, we're baking one at a time around here, and it works out fine. Every time I've done it, it's worked out fine. If you guys have watched some of my previous videos, you may see that I already did a microbakery weekend many months ago. I think it was back in the spring. I really like doing these microbakery weeks or weekends or however it plays out. It's so much fun. I really enjoy it. It gives me something to do, and just a good distraction from things sometimes. And I can be home, I can be in my kitchen, and I love to be home and to be in my kitchen. So I just really, really like these weeks and weekends. And I really like to give these things to my friends. Everyone who orders from me is always so appreciative, and I just love to bake for them. There's nothing like baking or giving out some kind of homemade goods to people. I feel like it's just so much more appreciated than anything you could buy at the store. So I really enjoy doing it. I think that they really enjoy eating it. So we're going to continue to do it for Thanksgiving week. So over the next couple of days, I'm going to try to bring you guys along for every part of the sourdough baking process. If not for every single loaf, then at least, parts here and there for the combination of everything that I'm doing. So I will bring you guys along for feeding my sourdough starters, getting some loaves prepped, working on the focaccia, making some of these cinnamon rolls. I didn't film that the other day, so I was just testing that recipe, which I had used that recipe before, but it had been a while, so I just wanted to make sure it was a good one. But I will share that with you guys. And yeah, I'm just going to kind of get a plan together for the timing of everything and how I want to bake everything through the week. I will have to, since I only have, I can make 6 starters if I need to. I can just pour this discard out into different jars and then feed those, and then I'll have more starters. I don't think I'm going to do that because I can't really store 6 loaves in my fridge. I guess I don't really need to if I do it that way, but regardless, I think I'm just going to keep the 3 that I have right now. And I'm going to feed them 3 at a time. I'm going to prep some of those loaves on Tuesday and just store them in the fridge overnight. And then the others I think will be fine at room temperature to bake on Wednesday, just timing wise. Before I get started with this busy week, if you guys haven't already, please like and subscribe. I need to do a video for like 1,000 subscribers. I just hit 1,000 subscribers and I am just overwhelmed at the amount of support from you guys. You guys have truly been absolutely amazing since I started my YouTube channel, providing lots of helpful tips and really good comments. And you guys have learned some things from me. I've learned some things from you. So it's just been really an encouraging platform. Very supportive, and I just want to say thank you for that. So yeah, if you haven't already, you're interested, please subscribe. I do lots of videos on sourdough baking, canning, gardening, just kind of beginner homesteading, and I'll continue posting videos like the ones that you guys love. And yeah, I just can't say thank you enough for all of the support. So thank you all again. All right, we're going to get started with this week. This is all that I have to do for Sunday for now. I'll keep this video going throughout the next 4 days. And yeah, just bring you guys along for the ride. Stay tuned. I have to bring these out to my friends tonight, so I'm going to go ahead and get them bagged up. Once I take them out of the Dutch oven, I always let them sit and rest for at least 2 to 3 hours. It's been probably 3, I think I finished at 10, so it's been about 3 hours now that they've been sitting cooling. I never like to bag them up when they're still warm just because it gets moisture in the bag and I don't want them to have any kind of moisture because I want them to stay dry and crispy. They're obviously moist on the inside, but I don't want the outside to get moist at all. When I squirt it, it makes this beautiful wheat looking pattern, and I don't like for that to get messed up just because I think it's gorgeous. And if it gets moisture or kind of gets messed up in the bag, then it'll definitely affect the look of the pattern. So that's why I like for everything to be cool and dry before I bag it up. I have these little bags from Amazon. They're so simple and they're perfect for this. I have used them the entire time I've been selling sourdough. So we're just gonna carefully put this in here. I usually like to put it so that you can see a bit of the wheat pattern in the bag, so I kind of put it a little bit kind of diagonal in there, and then we'll tape that, or we'll sticker that up in a second, seal it. And then our other one, we're not going to actually seal it, but we're just going to close the bag with a sticker so it stays closed and protected. Here we go. And then I have these little thank you stickers that come with the bags. They come in the package, so they just say handmade with love, especially for you, thank you. So they're perfect. I have not found the need to get any other stickers. I'm gonna just move this out of the way for a second and clean up this flour first. I just like to put it down in the bottom, but not too tight. And then just fold it up. Like I said, you want it to be dry. You don't want any moisture in your bag, because once you do this part and close it, it's gonna be a humid little environment in here if it still is hot. So, and then I'll just put a sticker on it. And here we go, a perfect little bagged loaf of sourdough. Then we'll go ahead and get the second one. And here we are. Beautiful. So I've got these all bagged up and ready. I'm just gonna leave them here on my counter. I don't have any other baking to do today. I don't think I have to prep any loaves tonight. I think that'll be tomorrow night. So I do have my sourdough starters fed, and if I don't need that, I'll just pour off the discard and save it. I have a big mason jar, a big quart mason jar in the fridge that I'm just saving all of my discard in for now, because the cinnamon roll recipes are discard recipes, so I'll use quite a bit for those. And then if I have extra, it's totally fine, because I need to restock my pizza doughs for the freezer. I don't have any more currently, which is really unfortunate. We always like to have sourdough pizza dough on hand, so I'm hoping to get to that in the next week or so too. So I'm just saving whatever discard I have right now for those purposes. And I did film this, but you couldn't actually see me in the film, so I just wanted to say for these bags, the reason also why I like for the bread to be nice and cool before I put it in the bag and sticker it up, because once you close it up, you're creating a really humid environment in here if the bread is still warm. So that can create more moisture. And like I said, I just don't want there to be a lot of moisture on the outside of the bread and to mess up the flour pattern and whatever else. So you just want to make sure you have nice, cool, crispy bread. There's no moisture at all in my bags right now, and they've been closed up for a few minutes. So this is perfect. A good 3-hour minimum, I would say, before you package them up is great. So we have a really busy week ahead. I'm so excited for it. I hope that you guys are excited, and I'll see you soon. I'm going to be doing a voiceover for the remainder of this video. I knew that this week was going to be really, really busy over the next 4 days of preparing sourdough, and I knew I wouldn't be able to take you through each step individually. I just didn't have time for that, but I have done this in a previous Sourdough Microbakery video that I made. I'll link that video so that you can go watch that. But anyways, I started on, I think this was Tuesday morning, by preparing 3 sourdough loaves. Some of these loaves are going to have inclusions in them, but I'm just starting with the basic steps for now. So we're just starting with flour and water, mixing that together so that this can auto-lyse before adding in our sourdough starter and salt. I love how simple sourdough is. I think people can very easily overcomplicate it, and I think that I was probably overcomplicating it in the beginning, but it's actually so simple. You're using very minimal ingredients: flour, water, and salt, and of course your sourdough starter, which is made from flour and water. So 3 basic key ingredients. Once you get it down a time or two, I feel like it just becomes like muscle memory. So we're just getting all of our flour and water mixed together, like I said, to start the auto-lyse process. I do this step and then I let it sit for about 30 to 45 minutes, kind of depending on my schedule and timing wise, to auto-lyse before then adding in the sourdough starter and the salt. So while these are resting before I add those other ingredients, I just like to cover them with a towel and use just a warm, damp towel just to keep your dough moist until you're ready to mix the other ingredients. I weigh all of my ingredients out on the kitchen scale. Just make sure that you're tearing it in between, zeroing it out before you add the next ingredient. You can use cup measurements if you like. I just have never done that with my sourdough starter, and my mind works so much better in grams than it does in cups for some reason. I know that cups are the standard measurement in the United States, but grams is just so much easier to work with. So if you have a good kitchen scale or want to pick yourself up a good kitchen scale, it doesn't even have to be a fancy one. We've had this one for literally years that we use for coffee measurements, and it has done the job just well. So if you want to work with grams or have recipes that are in grams or milliliters or anything like that, you can do those things on a kitchen scale, and it just makes things much, much easier than getting out measuring cups, measuring spoons, measuring it based on, what you need. And then sometimes those can be not super accurate depending on what you're measuring from one sourdough to the next, or, one recipe to the next. So grams just seems so much more accurate to me, and my sourdough pretty much turns out the exact same every single time. So I'm getting consistency among each loaf. Now for this next recipe, I'm going to go ahead and mix up a batch of the discard cinnamon rolls. This recipe is actually in cup and teaspoon measurements, so that's why you see me working with those things here instead of using my kitchen scale. I'll link the recipe below in the description for the discard cinnamon rolls that I like to use. Like I said, I had tested this recipe a few days earlier and it turned out really well, and I've used it before, and it seems to be a pretty no-fail recipe for me. The only thing that I did change about it calls for 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour. And because of my elevation, this was put in the description of the recipe. Because of my elevation, I needed to use a little bit more flour just to make them fluffy. So I use 3 cups of flour in this recipe, but if you live at sea level, normal elevation, or not too high, you can probably use the 2.5 cups of all-purpose flour, and I think it'll turn out just fine. So to the flour, I'm adding 8 tablespoons of butter. I am putting them in as just little flats of butter, mixing it up with the all-purpose flour, and then kind of breaking them up into pea-sized pieces. And then after that, we are adding 1/3 cup of sourdough starter discard, 1 1/3 cup tablespoons of granulated sugar, 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, and 3/4 teaspoon of salt. I also added 1 cup of milk earlier too. So just make sure that you mix all of those things up well. You want it to form into a pretty workable dough. A stand mixer is the easiest way to do this if you have one. And then afterwards, we're going to just kind of lightly flour a surface. You can add a little extra flour if you feel like it's needed. This dough tended to be a little bit stickier than some of my other cinnamon roll discard dough turned out throughout the week. I'm not really sure why that is. Maybe perhaps I put a little less flour in this batch than I did in the others, but like I said, 3 cups of all-purpose flour is really the sweet spot for me for this recipe. So when I rolled it into a ball, I did add a little bit more flour to it just to make it a little less sticky. You can see it here sticking to my rolling pin a little bit. But once it was well floured, it was very easy to work with. So for the filling, we've got 4 tablespoons of melted butter. We're adding 3/4 cup of light brown sugar to that and 2 teaspoons of cinnamon. Giving that a really good mix until it's all incorporated and mixed up very well. And then we're just going to brush the brown sugar cinnamon mixture along the dough, spread it pretty evenly, and make sure to leave space around the edges because if not, it'll spill out. I've learned that the hard way. You want the mixture to go to the edges, but leave a little bit of dough just kind of around the edges. That way you don't have a really messy cinnamon roll dough mixture to work with and to cut. But once I had it spread pretty close to the edges, I just rolled the dough towards me the long way, and then you're just going to pinch the ends together so that, again, everything stays contained within the dough. Again, my dough is just a little bit stickier than I would have liked. I could have either floured the surface a little bit better or just added a little more flour to the dough before rolling it out. I then cut it into 12 pieces and laid each piece in my aluminum pan here. You can use whatever pan you want. I think 9 by 13 is what's recommended in the recipe. You want the cinnamon side to be up, and you'll see I end up shifting these around because I realized I only need 3 going lengthwise instead of 4. This one little one here that you don't see much cinnamon on was an end piece, and I just don't think I had enough cinnamon all the way to the edges. So again, make sure you spread it evenly around the center, around the edges, just not too far where it leaks out, but you want it to go to each end for sure. So I just shifted those around a little bit so they would fit better, kind of flattening them just to make sure they're kind of even, and then tossing them into the oven for 40 minutes. While they're baking, I'm mixing up the glaze so I can just let that sit while the cinnamon rolls are in the oven. So for the glaze, we're using 1 1/4 cup of powdered sugar, 1 tablespoon of melted butter, 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, and 1 1/2 tablespoons of milk, mixing that together. And then we're just gonna, again, let that sit, and we'll be ready to drizzle that on the cinnamon rolls when they're fresh out of the oven. You want your cinnamon rolls to be lightly brown, so whatever time that takes, 35 to 40 minutes or so for you. It took about 45 minutes for me because of my elevation, but they turned out so good. Here I am just pouring the glaze on, and it ends up being plenty glaze, definitely enough. It covered every single roll pretty well, so I like the glaze recipe. I don't think I would change anything about that. And just in case you're wanting to save these or heat them up later, you can definitely add the glaze now and still reheat it with the glaze on. It turned out so good. So after adding our sourdough starter and salt to our loaves that we were preparing, I let them sit for about an hour. And then we're going in for stretch and folds. I do about 4 stretch and folds every 30 minutes. So 1 full cycle every 30 minutes for a total of 4 stretch and folds. And then we'll let it sit for like 8 or so hours. Also mixing up some other doughs. We have 1 loaf now that is ready to bake. I think this might have been Wednesday morning at this point. This is a rosemary garlic loaf that I had prepared. The morning before, Tuesday morning, I prepped one of these loaves. Tuesday night, I added roasted rosemary and garlic that I just roasted in the oven for about 15 minutes to this loaf. After including the rosemary and garlic, I then floured some parchment paper, put the parchment paper into the banneton, and then just kind of flip the loaf into the parchment, onto the parchment. And I cover that with a damp towel again, and I let that sit in the refrigerator overnight just so that it doesn't overproof, since my dough had already been sitting out at room temperature for about 8 hours. I got the dough scored, and we are going to get it into a hot oven. I like to preheat my oven at 500 degrees with the Dutch oven in it, and then turn the temperature down to 450. I like to bake it with the lid on for 25 minutes, and then I bake it with the lid off for another 25 to 30 minutes until it's complete. So you see me jumping back and forth between doughs. That's truly what I was doing this entire week. As one was baking, I was trying to get another one prepped, and vice versa. So that's what's happening here. I also have more loaves to do this week, of course, so I'm feeding sourdough starter so that I'll be able to prep these loaves on Wednesday morning. I think actually going back, this clip is still from Tuesday, so again, just kind of back and forth. You can see it's just a really busy 4 days of baking. I don't even think I included every single loaf in here because it was so much. But I've tried to take clips here and there of everything that I was doing. So I'm just getting some sourdough starter fed. Again, just flour and water, letting it rise for the day so that I can get some loaves prepped on Tuesday night that would be ready to bake Wednesday morning. Wednesday morning was my last time of baking. I say Wednesday morning, it actually took 7 hours on Wednesday for me to bake everything that I needed to bake. Between Sunday and Wednesday, I had 13 sourdough orders. Some of those were loaves, I think 1 focaccia, 3 cinnamon roll recipes, just a lot. Here's that rosemary garlic coming out of the oven. It turned out really well. Unfortunately, I did have some issues this week of my loaves not rising as much as they normally do once baked. I think it was a humidity issue, and I think I remember from last winter actually, I usually do a high hydration dough where when I'm mixing it up and adding the flour and water, I usually do extra water. I do about 380 grams of water instead of about 350. So I think in the winter, I'll just need to decrease the water in my loaves just to get that better rise when it bakes in the oven. So here I am mixing up a focaccia loaf. I like to use the recipe from Whispering Willow Farm, and that's where I ordered my original dehydrated sourdough starter from, and that's the same starter that I'm still using today. So that recipe is 100 grams of sourdough starter, 375 grams of water, 30 grams of honey, 500 grams of white bread flour, 12 grams of sea salt, and 50 grams of olive oil. So add your wet ingredients in first and then add your dry ingredients. I include the olive oil last, as you see here, like with the dry ingredients. You want there to be a lot of olive oil in your focaccia bread. Don't be afraid if you add too much olive oil or if you think it needs more, because once we get ready to bake it, we're going to add additional olive oil to it anyways. So I don't measure the olive oil in that part. That step doesn't really matter with the oil. I just do enough to coat the pan, and I'll show you all of that. So we're going to get this mixed up. We're going to cover it overnight and let it rise for about 12 hours, and then the next morning we'll be all ready to bake our focaccia. This recipe is much easier and less time consuming than a traditional sourdough loaf. It just does not take as long to mix up or to prep. So the dough that I was mixing up earlier this day, it has been rising for about 8 hours now. So I am going to do like a pre-shape so that I can sit overnight. We are just gonna, these are plain loaves. I'm just gonna get them floured and shaped into just circular loaves. And if I'm allowing any more than about 12 hours of rise time, then I will place it in the fridge at that point. So these loaves will get refrigerated overnight again so that they don't overproof. I keep my kitchen cool, but because of all the baking this week, I think it was a little bit warmer. And your dough is much more likely to overproof if it is in a warmer environment. So these are just plain loaves. Sometimes with the inclusions like the rosemary and garlic, I may include that and go ahead and put it in the dough the night before so that I can do a pre-shape with the inclusions already in it. And then I just have to do a final shape the next morning. But you'll see I end up doing a apple brown sugar cinnamon loaf. I don't think that I filmed every part of the inclusion process for that, but I have in my other micro bakery video. I have a clip there where you can see how I put either apple or pear and a brown sugar cinnamon mixture in it. Anything that's liquidy, that has juices like the juice from the apple, anything like that, I like to put that in the day of, because it will just make your dough so moist, because all of the juices like to leak out. It happens in the oven as well. The juices will kind of leak out into the Dutch oven. So that's just something to be mindful of. So anything with like dry ingredients, I don't mind prepping the night before, but anything that has more wet ingredients, I like to include that the day of. So back to the focaccia, we're going to coat our pan, and I'm using the aluminum pans again because I'm giving this away with olive oil. I did a mixture this time. I like to use an herb olive oil, but I don't have any of the ones that I like. So I'm doing regular olive oil, basil olive oil, and a garlic olive oil, just to add a more herby flavor. This is a herbed focaccia. That's exactly what I was making. I wasn't doing any fancy, scenes or decorations on the focaccia this time, just herbs and basic focaccia. So I just wanted a mixture of some herbs and garlic in this olive oil. While I'm watching this back, I am putting it on my list right now to go soon to the olive oil store and restock on some of the herb olive oils that I really like to use for focaccia, because it's really disappointing to not have that. This one I'm sure turned out great. I obviously didn't try it because it was for a friend, but it smelled great and it looked great, and I'm sure it was delicious. So we're going to coat our pan very, very generously with olive oil, and you'll see why in just a second. So this is the next morning after our focaccia dough has been sitting overnight at room temperature for about 12 hours. It still looks pretty moist as we take the towel off, which is good. And I think that's because it has olive oil in it. It's just a moist dough to work with. So we are going to get that into the pan, and you want to coat both sides of this with olive oil. So I just kind of coat the bottom, and then we will flip it and coat the top side and the edges. You want the corners and edges to be pretty coated as well. My pan was sliding around a lot because I'm not used to using these aluminum pans. I usually use glass dishes, of course, but again, this was just a really easy solution to be able to just give them away and not have to worry about getting anything back. A lot of these friends were taking these things to Thanksgiving events the next day, so it worked out perfect. And also, if you were doing that, then you could reheat it in this pan if you wanted it to be heated, if it was the cinnamon rolls or whatever. So kind of perfect. I add just a little bit more olive oil to the top, and then we're going to cover it again with a damp towel for 2 to 3 hours, room temperature, to let it rise. While that's going on, flipped back to another loaf. I think this was just one of the plain loaves, it looks like. I did a pre-shape on it the night before. I think this was one that I just flipped out from parchment paper. I'm just doing a final shape. As I do that, I just want to get it really, really good into as tight of a ball as possible. Again, I was having a lot of issues with my dough on this day, and I think it was just too hydrated. I used too much water in the recipe. But this is like the final shaping process. And then I love, love, love these bread slings. They have been so easy to bake on. I used to bake on parchment paper, and then I started baking on these. You just put them right in your Dutch oven, take it out with the sides of the sling. It's perfect. So I like to move the bread onto the sling first before scoring so that I don't then mess up the score by moving it. I typically just do like a standard wheat pattern. It's much easier to score your dough if you do the smaller parts of the decoration first and then save the middle, or like the where you want the ear flap to be, the deepest score, the biggest part of the dough, for last, ideally. I usually do one side of the score, then do that part, and then just finish up my smaller scores on the other side. But it's just much easier to do that middle score after you've already done kind of your bigger scores on one side. So just scoring it on the other side, doing some small scores. If you don't score your dough, it will score itself in the oven, essentially. It will break wherever it decides to break in the oven if it doesn't have a way to release some of that steam as it's baking. So that's the reason for scoring your dough. And then it just creates a beautiful, beautiful loaf in the end if you have some skills and techniques on scoring. I'm still trying to learn all the skills and techniques on scoring, but this is just my standard go-to, and it turns out really beautiful. So here you can see I'm making another rosemary garlic loaf. I think this was the second one of the week, and I just like to, I had it in the Tupperware because the night before I had roasted some garlic and rosemary, again in the oven just for like 15 minutes. And I, for some reason, wasn't using it that night. I was just going to use it the next day. So here I am the next day, peeling the garlic, chopping it up, getting the rosemary off the stem. And then I just kind of like to add these one at a time to the surface of the inside of a dough. So getting it all chopped up. It's so hard not to eat it at this point because I love roasted garlic. It's probably one of my top 5 favorite things in the world to eat. And with the rosemary, it's just absolutely delicious. So we are getting one of our regular loaves removed from the bowl. And again, on a generously floured surface. You can't really flour this too much before baking. You're going to add flour to the top anyways, so as long as you're not adding flour to the inside of the dough, the outside doesn't matter so much. So I usually just add kind of one or the other at a time, coat the surface with rosemary and then with the garlic, and then just fold the dough in. I usually like to grab corners of it and fold it into a circle, then try to shape it as best as possible. I have found that doing this keeps the ingredients, the inclusions kind of throughout the dough instead of just in the middle or on the top or the bottom. You kind of learn that after a while. I feel like there's a little bit of a technique to it, But honestly, just putting it on the surface of the dough turns out fine. And here it is after baking. Absolutely stunning. After the couple of hours of the focaccia dough rising, I'm going to go in and just dimple the dough. This just allows for a really, really fluffy, beautiful focaccia loaf in the end. And then if you're adding other ingredients to it, like as you can see here, this is just fresh garlic. This is not roasted garlic. It's gonna roast on the bread anyway, so I just chop some pieces up and kind of stick them in some of the dimpled parts of the focaccia. And then adding some fresh herbs. I added fresh thyme, fresh rosemary, and parsley to this herbed focaccia, in addition to the basil herbed olive oil that I used. And just kind of splitting all of those things up off the stem, adding it to the focaccia. I'm going to bake this at 425 degrees for 25 to 30 minutes. I usually add a little bit extra time at my elevation just because it takes longer to bake things here, and because I like for it to get a really solid like golden crust on top. You don't want it to be over baked, but once you see that the olive oil has completely cooked into the dough, that's your sign that it's pretty much done. And once the top is a nice golden color. Again, just prepping, I think this was the rosemary garlic loaf, getting that ready for the oven, and just trying to multitask as much as I can. Again, this was a 7-hour baking day for me, and I wasn't feeling the best on this day, not gonna lie, so it was a challenge. But it ended up, everything turned out great. Again, if I have any regrets, it's just that maybe I wouldn't add too much water to my doughs in the wintertime just to give them a better rise in the oven. Here's the apple cinnamon brown sugar loaf. These are absolutely stunning. I ended up making one for myself this day because the bottom got a little crispy on one of them, so I just saved that and then thankfully had an extra loaf to remake it. Here's the herbed focaccia after it came out of the oven. These always smell so good. And then my apple brown sugar loaf, I cut into the middle of it just to see how it looked, and it was a gorgeous crumb. Have no complaints about it. It turned out so, so good, so I'm sure the other one did as well. Here's the 3 batches of cinnamon rolls on this day. These were actually really fun to make, though. I would make these 100 times over. I love cinnamon rolls. A couple of the loaves. All of my loaves also had a really odd shape this day, but again, smelled so good and absolutely delicious. I never did a sign off this day after baking all of these things. I was just exhausted. But I just want to say thank you guys so much for watching this video. Again, please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!